Just as a human society can be compared to cells in a petri dish, it could be compared to galaxies in a galaxy cluster. Many of the galaxies stay safe, together at the center, and a few leave the group and travel outward into the darkness. Each galaxy in a cluster has an equation of state, which includes continuity, momentum, pressure, magnetic field, density, velocity, and velocity dispersion. Velocity dispersion is the measure of how much it deviates from the surrounding flow that controls its neighbors. Society does that too. There are outliers who insist on doing things differently, like an advanced guard, living far away from what's considered safe, choosing radically different belief systems, and rolling the dice as far as survival. They might die off the way the safe people assume they would, or they might be the last people left. Ideally, the result is a successful navigation of the unforeseeable road for everyone. And this seems to be one of the mysteries of self-organized flow, the fact that there will always be some members of a community that are different. If you got rid of all of them, some from the central safe group would eventually strike out on their own. Picture the crater, a great bowl, the mind of man. At the center of the crater is what they call sanity in our culture. A small spot, well lit, surrounded by a white picket fence, the test tube of human knowledge where science reigns supreme. Just outside that well-lit town is a jungle of the unconscious, also a form of awareness, but not as brightly lit. A short fall through the white picket fence and out into the jungle is referred to as madness or insanity. What a shaman does is walks right out the front gate, and with the help of a spirit guide, goes through the jungle of madness, protected by the spirit guide, on a journey that would otherwise be dangerous. And at some point, they come to a hill at the edge of the flat part of the crater. And rather than stopping, they trundle upward through the harsh jungle until they reach a peak, the edge of the crater. And from there, the shaman, the Buddha, the Taoist immortal, the Jivan Mukta, can see everything. The little town at the center where he was born, the huge surrounding jungle, and the entire rim of the crater. And from there, seeing beyond the crater into the vast expanse. And the shaman can see from there that it's certainly not that little town at the center of the crater that controls the vastness. So when someone said, the head controls the body, it strikes me as wrong. It might be what they teach in science class. And someone said, because it's at the top. Ideally, the head and the body are in a partnership working together toward the same purpose. At worst, the head is a parasite. The Taoists use the terms host and guest when talking about the physical body and the netherworld of the human mind, respectively. And they often point out the need to separate host and guest, to see which is which, to feed both, and to bring about harmony between the two. When a person occupies the penthouse in a hotel, they're at the top. The hotel caters to them, like the body catering to the mind's requests. The guests are provided with a comfortable environment. They're provided with room service when they request it. Linens are cleaned. Pools and saunas are made available. And a guest might get the impression, at first glance, that because everything they ask for is provided, and they are at the top, that the head controls the body, or the guest controls the host. But this is misleading and only goes so far. If the guest destroys the room, there are consequences, and ultimately the guest is left without a host, so they have to work together in order to keep the relationship harmonious. And the guest doesn't control the host. They don't hire the staff or do the building maintenance or maintain hot and cold water, and they didn't build the building. And even though in Western culture it's popular to say, my body, the guest doesn't own the host. The conscious mind doesn't control the heartbeat or the working of the liver and digestion or the repair of cells and the building of proteins based on DNA in those cells. Those are the work of the host. And then the human body doesn't live in a vacuum, so the conscious mind didn't create the sun and the earth and the moon and the wind and the tides, or the larger harmonies in which those are situated, and without which the body wouldn't exist. All that is the host. In a human being, this applies to things like the choice of diet. The host needs vegetables, oils, protein, roughage, and the guest wants sugar, carbs, artificial stimulation, and relaxation. Another kid asked, is sugar not good for anything? Well, not for the host. It does feed the guest, and to a certain point, the guest can brighten, enhance, and glorify the host with insight, understanding, compassion, and beautiful dreams. But passing that point of temperance is like walking down the beach, passing the shoreline, and straight into the ocean, heart falling into that ocean of transgression and swept away. A guest that doesn't understand this tends to act like a parasite, using the hotel as a resource to be plundered. But of course, that will eventually result in loss of the host, if there's not an agreement to provide payment to the host for services provided. In a hotel, it's the rules of the hotel being followed and the bill being paid. In a human body, it's the cultivation of the host, adequate sleep, proper diet, appropriate levels of exercise, and a pursuit of positive and loving relationships. With a pattern like that, the host is taken care of and continues to provide service, the comfortable environment for the guest. Without the pattern, the host deteriorates and the guest is left without the resources of the host. By asking if sleep is necessary, or asking what it's for, by saying we can get all our nourishment from vitamins, by saying we know everything that everyone could possibly need to live a good life, the modern culture encourages the idea that the guest controls the host, that the mind controls the body. And it's Eastern mysticism that provides the alternate perspective. Modern culture hypertrophies the guest. We tend to live lives focused on the subjective, on the pleasure experienced by consciousness, with a minority of concern allocated to sustainability and the environment. The alternative perspective is that the host is the primary, the root from which the buds of consciousness sprout. And if we look around at other life forms, it's the host that can live without the guest, while a guest without a host is a ghost. I find most people in today's world are human separatists. But these days, the news presents them with the microbiome, and so at some level, they have to accept the web they're part of. As a shaman, I receive, accept, and endure communion with all creatures, among other things, the immortal hive mind of the fungus that stretches below. I call what we live in the educo-military-industrial complex. Because if you look at the typical and ubiquitous complaints about our civilization, that it's mindless, distracted, frivolous, technologically obsessed, violent, and isolated, I think they can all be explained if you think of this modern culture as driven by war. In the longest peacetime of modern history, it all makes more sense if you think of it as an extended reaction to the World War I and World War II era, ever more disconnected from a natural way of life and more urgently involved in a militarized economy, with nothing more important for the teenagers than to eat and play video games about warfare, with a consciousness optimized by diet and drugs to follow the commander's orders and march into battle simple-mindedly with the masses, all in line with the DC Comics chart about who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, informed by an internet about what to think, and by the movies about superheroes and about how the fight is supposed to lead to victory. With everyone expected to utilize the military hardware of machines, the cars, the planes, and the computers, and abandoning their horse-based economy of their farm-based ancestors. With an unspoken mandate to optimize for the national fight, the economy all important in global combative relations, burning fossil fuels and machines initially intended for the military and carrying supercomputers in their pockets that also grew out of that same military mindset. So as a 7-year-old boy bristled recently as he was being forced to hurry up and get ready and do his homework and do all the dreaded things that aren't fun for him, I told him, "It's the militarized culture we live in. You got here kind of late. If you would have gotten here 200 years ago, we'd be fine with taking our time and playing, relaxed in a culture of ease, eventually grooming ourselves to take on the chores that make a healthy community. But about 100 years ago, after the Brothers Grimm wrote their stories designed to create a sense of nationalism, the world has grown increasingly focused on the imaginary emergency of war. And though technically the war is over, and has been for 50 years, the culture never got over the sense and the mode that it fell into. And the emergency is still the driving force that says we have to hurry up and be prepared. And that's the prevailing perspective that makes everything about the current education system actually make sense. It's as if the bombing runs of World War II are continuing daily over all the cities, and disaster is about to strike at any time. So forget about what your interests might be. We don't have the luxury of time for the beauty of human neoteny. There's a war going on. You're going to need to obey the commander and learn the simple skills that all our lives depend on. I also remind myself, when contemplating the military educo-industrial complex, that this world of modern times is a grand experiment, where never before have this many people lived this close together, both physically and also virtually. And the species has reacted to the experiment for the most part with fear rather than faith. And so everybody has to work and struggle and get with the program, the fear understood implicitly in the look of wild-eyed rage in the eyes of teachers, administrators, and parents as they insist we get in line. So though we know scientifically through studies that play is more important than homework for kids to grow up happy and healthy, we ignore that fact in favor of preparing for the competition of the imaginary emergency. And then in my dialectical debate, I come back around to remember what a turtle once told me. A couple of years ago, I took a class with the turtle. As a shaman, I listen to as many creatures as will talk to me, and I meet many teachers from other species. I took the class over the course of a summer. There was a class, a test, and a shorter advanced class before my teacher surprised me by going face down into the mud under his lake and shutting down his heartbeat and breathing, entering hibernation stage, demonstrating and putting into practice everything he'd been teaching me about turtle clarity and turtle destiny. One afternoon, after a powerful Dallas rainstorm, I teased the turtle, as he would often tease me, and looking at the unusually murky green of the lake he was swimming in, I said, "Your lake is looking pretty green today." My teacher's simple answer is now my prepared statement for any time anyone complains about the world we live in, whether about the education system or the poisons in the environment or the military mentality of our culture. He smiled and said, "Yeah, it's my wonder home." People talk about happiness a lot, and I think it's a word we use for several different things. I don't want to pursue transient happiness, the happiness that comes with swordfish and a glass of wine and good conversation. Buddha once pointed out that anything that gives you transient happiness when you have it will give you transient sadness when you lose it. I'm more interested in compassion happiness, the happiness beyond birth and death that's inextricably intertwined with compassion. I went to see Amma, the hugging saint, who hugged 34 million people and started programs around the world to help the poor. She came out on a stage in a large hotel conference center, did a sermon, chanted, and then proceeded to hug everybody while whispering in our ears. The deep happiness of Amma is not transient happiness. It's compassion happiness. It's beyond the material world. And there's no way to be that happy without simultaneously being flooded with compassion. And no way to be that compassionate without simultaneously being flooded by happiness. And each tradition only uses so many words to try to lead students into the ideas of transcendence and timelessness. I told an 8-year-old kid while walking down a New York City street that I'm immortal. He said, "Walk out in the street and get hit by a bus then." So I said, "No, you misunderstand. The issue is who and what and where I am. No place, no time. The zero essence, zero appearing in the zero dimension. My body is my time garden, and I don't set it on fire, and I'm not careless with it, and I don't abandon it to the wind. I cultivate it. I help it grow into its destiny, its longevity. Charlie isn't what I am. It's what I'm wearing, what I speak and pray through. And the same thing is wearing the universe. It's wearing each of us. So we're really all the same thing. We're just wearing different costumes. So immortality is a meditation. It's not a superhuman power. The value is the end of suffering, the move from finite and limited to boundlessness. A course on the book This Thing Called You by Ernest Holmes began with a meditation on a door. Picture a door. On one side is the world, the finite universe, the physical environment, including your body and conscious mind. On the other side of the door is your spiritual being, God, infinite possibility. You choose what kind of door this will be. You choose if it will be opened or closed, or cracked open just a little. Stand in the doorway and look at the world on the one side as it is. Then turn around and look out the other side, the infinite. Now take the door off the hinges and let the two sides flow through each other naturally. In Taoism, they speak of the three borders of past, present, and future, and then of what is beyond the three borders. The Book of the Five Talisman ends with an invitation to that beyond. They call it Brahman, the One. It's the home of divinity. And the past, present, and future are the yards outside surrounding the house, front yard, backyard, and a side yard. Out in the present, alone there, the winds blow up a storm from the other areas, the traumas of the past, the concerns about the future, winds that travel on stories we tell ourselves, sometimes paralyzing spirit in its tracks, limiting the growth of the tree of life. Once we go past the three borders of past, present, and future existence, recognizing ourselves in immortality, the perspective changes, and we can act with love, achieve compassion happiness, work wonders. That's the magic in the power. Being is becoming, but while it's still outside of time. The recollection of being in becoming is the source of love, the consciousness of fullness. Where my heart can't help but bristle is if and when we say that's all there is when we look out only one side of the door at the physical environment of the finite side. So I like to call my body and time the time garden, vortex of struggle and beauty, where the environment can thrive, but of course just as easily can be destroyed and perish. But I place my self with a capital S, my highest self, beyond that, like Vishnu in his Vaikuntha, outside of time, in what the Catholic would call eternity, in what I call anti-time heaven. I tend to my time garden daily, eat the vegetables, do the exercise, but I finish up and I return to my Vaikuntha farmhouse at the end of the day. Often I wake to a thriving metropolis of splendor in my garden. But sometimes inevitably there's drought, hail damage, rabbit theft, fire and wind, and I do what I can to alleviate the suffering in the garden and start over with the cultivation. The key, though, is that there is a transcendent realm beyond that garden, the farmhouse at the center of the vortex, anti-time heaven, Vaikuntha, and that's where I locate myself, like the number 5. You can draw a 5 in the sand and call that a home for 5 within the time garden, but when that home surely burns, it's not a threat to me. Indeed, just like Lao Tzu taught, there is no kill site. So it's the home of immortality. So in this vision, derived from Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, everything flows except the changeless immortality of who and what and where we really are. The light from the lantern of immortality is a powerful shelter from that storm, once you know it's there. And when we carry out a spiritual practice, chant the mystic law, we're lined up at the border, staring at the door and talking to ourselves on the other side, the Buddha, the immortal, and answering the call of the Buddha nature, ourselves on the other infinite side of the door. The idea of primal heaven salvation is that we awaken to our immortality, the secret truth of our ancestors, flying away from our mundane lives into a life more like that of the stars, into a mind that is quiet, simple, and pure, rising like the sun into the sky, steadily ascending in fullness and peace into heaven, the eternally flowing river of immortality, in a festival of salvation that reaches the other shore, beyond the 3 borders of past, present, and future existence, stepping into the ripening that attains the seat of immortality, flying above the 3 borders to win the beyond.